Hello, my friends. What's happening? Nice little Sunday here in LA. I was talking to my UK friends who are all, it's getting cold there apparently, and so I'm going to enjoy this last little bit of sun we got in LA before it gets a little colder. How you guys all doing today? Getting Matt on here shortly. Let's see. A few requests. Making it happen. Go live. What's up?
What's up?
How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, man. How are you?
I'm doing well as well. You're in a different spot than before.
I've got a house full of artists, so I'm actually in my studio. So
oh, nice. Oh, that's right. Yeah. I was there a few weeks ago. You were kind enough to lend me a whole bunch of guitar pedals, which is another topic we may get into today. I know we were sort of billboarded as talking about vocals, but you're also quite the guitar wizard, and there were some questions about guitars too. So if we get through vocals, maybe we can switch over to some of that stuff. But yeah. So who's I don't want you to blow anybody's spot up, but you got artists at the house, and
a super talented South African singer-songwriter by way of New York. We'd been doing FaceTime sessions, and it kind of got to the point where, okay, we got like 10, 15 songs. Let's have you fly out here. Everybody get tested. And they've been camping out in my guest room and writing. And we actually hit the studio for the first time today. Like we've had like a week or two of just writing, and today we're sending stuff out. So
that's very exciting.
Yeah, man.
So you're actually tracking things.
Actually tracking things today. All these things that we're talking about, we're gonna do today. So
that's great, man.
Yeah.
We got lots of good questions about vocals and things. I wanted to say off the bat, and you and I talked about it when I was over at your spot. You know, when we had our first live, we talked about our vocal chains, and my vocal chain has actually changed a little bit, which I told you about. You know, I've been using my late '70s U87 as my main vocal mic for a number of years. I used to love a 67 when I worked at Eric Valentine's place. He had a particularly great pair of U67s, which were just magical on vocals. And then I was using 87 for a long time, and I have this U47 as well. There it is. There's a 50.
That's a nice microphone.
Yeah, that's a nice microphone. 50s long body U47. And I think in my old studio, I just didn't quite find the chain or the thing that I liked. I mean, I like the sound of the mic. It's a great mic, but there's something about the 87 I was more comfortable with. And when I moved into the new spot here, I started using it a bit more and experimenting with a bit more. And now it's my main vocal mic.
Is your room there a bit more live?
It's about the same, I would say. Actually, I would say maybe even my last spot was a bigger room. Although I did have a vocal booth for a long time there as well. So even when I was using, actually a pair of 87s, which are very close, a pair of vintage 87s. So I had one in like next to the desk and then one in the vocal booth, so I could have the same chain basically, or very similar. But I think it's just a matter of getting in and getting used to it. It's something that I think a good general piece of advice for people, which is really get to know the pieces of gear you have. I think whether it's a plug-in or a microphone or a keyboard or a guitar or whatever it is, more tools may be inspiring. New, exciting microphones, keyboards, that sort of thing are exciting and fun to play with. But really having a deep knowledge of the things that you have is going to yield the best results. And I've only had this mic for a few years. So really spending time with it and getting to where I really understood the EQ curve and what I could do with it. It's an amazing vocal mic. And of course the tube aspect of it as well is adds all this high end.
I mean, I think I think that it's hard to go wrong with a 40. I mean, it's I would say like the Les Paul and Stratocaster of the mic world is the 251 and the U47. I feel you'd be hard pressed to go wrong. A couple of things that you said that kind of made me think is that, first of all, part of knowing gear, it's like when I gave you all those guitar pedals this week, last week, I have no sense of time. It's like, Rafiki, it is in the past,
The long ago. It's probably thousands of years ago at this point.
We were talking about, I like to get things one by one, because if I get like 4 or 5 things at once, I don't really know how to use any of them. And if I get one thing, I just get hyped on it and spend like, a week in the studio just completely nerding out and like trying to figure it out and get good. And you get a much better relationship with the piece of gear. Like you have a better sense of what it does than if you only get to fuck with it for a couple of minutes. And it's like part of like I would hate to get a new studio all at once. I would actually prefer to get like gear one by one and figure out what it does. Two, it was interesting because you would come from the U67, which is an incredibly bright mic on purpose. There's like a lot of stuff in a U67.
Same capsule as the 251.
But a huge network of EQing and shit goes on inside. It's not a very pure mic. It's kind of like the line 6 pod of mics. There's like a lot of circuitry in a U67 to kind of make it sound like it sounds, which is why you said that Eric had a particularly good pair.
They were modded, so they, like you said, there's a lot going on in there. They had pieces taken out.
That's the other thing, is that one, almost any vintage 67 is going to have the same mod. There's like a mod done in like the 80s or something like that opened up the top end even more that everybody loves, and that's why people love them, because they got really bright.
100%.
But because of that, you can't just like go to Vintage King and order a 67 online. They all sound completely fucking different. So like my buddy Sam's got a really great U67 that's like, no joke, now been passed down his family from generations. Like it was his dad's and now it's his, and I'm sure his kids will get it next, but it's brilliant. And then I've heard some 67s that are absolute garbage. So it depends on what you get. You said 67 to 87, which is also a bright mic, to the 47. It made me think that maybe you liked the 47 because you were getting like maybe it's the smaller room, but just like a slap. Because I would think the 87 would be brighter. I think that it would have more zing than the 47.
It may be brighter on the extended top end, but there's a presence that, and also again, the mics are very different. There's a presence that the 47 has, which is more exciting or has more information than the 87s that I have.
It reminds me of when you were talking about ribbon mics, is that those really good old mics, even if they might not be like Guitar Center modern mic, like wow, right off the thing, there's so much more resolution in the information that you get from them that you can EQ them really well. It's there to EQ. So like people are like, a ribbon mic's dark, but yeah, if you lift up the EQ on a ribbon mic, there's still a lot of really beautiful information in there. Whereas
maybe even more,
exactly. Like I know they have a thing on digital cameras with those sensors that if you blast like too much light into them, it just goes white. That's it. There is no more detail. And I feel like it's kind of like that. Like if you get a mic that's like too bright, really bright capsule, it just gets, and you can't get that information back. It's just kind of like, it's just kind of blanked out. So I think the 47's great. I'm glad that you've rediscovered it.
Well, it's something we did talk about before, and I think it's a useful piece of information to repeat, that how a microphone sounds, especially cheaper microphones, when you first pull it up, is not necessarily indicative of what you can get out of it. A lot of, when using older mics, when using vintage mics, they're not going to be as immediately as bright, because of course, kind of like if you put two songs next to each other and one of them's a little bit brighter, your ear's naturally going to go, oh, that's better, right?
Or louder.
Louder, exactly. So a lot of modern mics are very bright, but if you use vintage mics, you may be getting more information, and then you can EQ from there and get a much better high end with the same amount of brightness. It's funny when you said, if you just get a 67 from Vintage King, it may not sound. I did that twice. I got two, and I think one was from Vintage King, or a pair was from Vintage King, and maybe another one was from another vintage mic seller. And I did the thing where I got them loaned for a week and put them up against all of the microphones at Eric's place, and Eric's 67s. Of course, they didn't have all the mods and things, but they just sounded like trash.
And that's
saved me thousands. I mean, I didn't buy them because of that.
And that's not an indictment on Vintage King, because whenever I need my vintage gear in Los Angeles, I reach for Vintage King.
Shout out Vintage King. I believe I have bought some stuff from them before.
I actually really love those guys. It's just, if you get them, I didn't mean to put them on blast. If you get a vintage mic from anybody, it's why my 251s actually was a newer one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned that. I'm very happy with this setup now. Everything else is the same. I'm still using the Undertone Pre and a Revision F1176.
Now that's a great example, because I think we talked about that. I don't know if we talked about it on your podcast, but I tried to get I actually got an Undertone Pre when we were doing the Cruella record, and that was one of those pieces of gear. That is clearly a brilliant piece of gear, and it's so well made, and it's made by a guy that actually makes records, which I always think is important, because those guys know what you need. It's like the Little Lab stuff. Yeah. But I couldn't get to work for me. It sounded fantastic, but when I went and put it in tracks, for the way that I record and the way that my post usually is and the things that I'm used to, the Chandler would just worked better for me. Yeah. But I think it's a really great example, because you get great results using the Undertone stuff because you know it really well. It's like what we were talking about earlier, and you know how to dial it in. And when you need something, you know how to get it out of it. For me, the Chandler stuff works better, but it's not an indictment on either one. It's just, what is the thing that you need from that gear, and can it give it to you?
And we talked about it last time, but remind me again, your setup is a new but modded 251, Elam 251, the Telefunken into it.
And by the way, very lightly, if you went to Telefunken and got a 251, when they built it, I just asked them to put a brighter capsule in it, because we do a lot of pop.
Yeah. And so it's the same capsule, but it's just one that is brighter. Do you know exactly what they did to it?
No, you can tune capsules. You can kind of push them one way or the other within a certain degree. That's why those Manley mics used to be so good. There was one dude who would sift through 1,000 capsules and be like, garbage, 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 good. And he left the company a couple of years ago, and it's why the new Manley mics just aren't as good as the old. Do you know what they would do with they would just retune all the capsules that he didn't like? No, I think they just chucked them. They were so the irony was that everybody got on the Manley mic craze because it was what Luke and Max were using. And Luke had a really good one, but they were Chinese capsules. So they were these really mass-produced capsules, and it just turned out the guy literally sat in a room in the Manley warehouse, chucking them over his shoulder.
He was the quality control.
Yeah, and it was Manley makes all this great tube gear, and there was one dude in one room responsible for the microphones, and when he left, it's just not quite the same. You know?
So you're 251 into which Chandler? Is it just the Chandler?
I use a Chandler TG channel. Okay. Most of the guys that I know use the TG2, which is 2 sets of the preamps in one rack gear.
Yeah.
And those actually have a little bit more gain, but I don't need it. The TG channel is one channel of the TG mic pre with a really, really bitchin' EQ, like an EMI Abbey Road EQ essentially in it. And I really love that. And I actually have a TG2 too, but I use the TG2 also, but I use the channel for vocals.
Do you have a set EQ setting that you use all the time? Do you adjust it a little bit? Are you doing much in there?
I adjust it a little bit. The two things that I love, and which I actually think are great tips for anybody, is one of the things I love about the TG channel is it's got a low cut on it. And I love being able to get some of the low end rumble, especially on vocals, out of the chain before you hit the compressor.
Not just a high pass filter, but an actual low EQ, or is a high pass filter?
No, well, it has both, but I actually just use a high pass filter. So, and I'll get rid of everything below 60 or 90, or depending on the singer and how much weight we need at the bottom of that range. But I've always just been a big fan of trying to get out the low end before you hit the compressor. Trying to get the shit that you don't need out of your vocal before you hit the compressor.
Well, what always happens is you get a loud plosive, a P or a B or something, and it has that big low end boom, and then it triggers the compressor, and it makes everything all squirrely.
Fuck it up. Yeah, and then I there's a guy named Alan Yoshida who I think Alan used to, who used to be the mastering guy at Ocean Way on Sunset and Gower.
Yeah.
And he blew my mind with this piece of advice. He had mastering console and it went up to like 24 or 32K. And he was like, why?
EQ did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is some serious nerd shit.
Let's go.
He was like, why would you need 24K or 32K if you can't hear it? That's like way above the realm of human hearing. He did it so he could lift like 10, 11, 12K. So let me see if we can follow around.
Yeah.
Where you have an EQ, where the bell is, you're going to get some phase anomalies. Like it kind of gets a little bit ringy. Like when you hear a cool Moog filter synth or whatever, it's because you have a really sharp bell, or really what they call Q at that frequency point.
Yeah.
And it sounds kind of ish. The other thing is like when you make an EQ, you raise something, you're not just raising the frequency, you're also raising all of the shit to the left and the right of it.
Yeah.
So the trick is when you do something that's like 24K EQ, let me see if I get this right this way, and you go really up high, you're raising all this information that you can't even hear. But the practical effect is right around 10, 11, 12, you're getting this really beautiful lift without any of the ringing, as if you would set an EQ at 10, 11, or 12.
Right.
Plus, you're not getting any lift at like 3, 4, 5K because you've pushed the bell curve so far over. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it's almost like a shelving EQ does everything above a certain frequency, but you could do the same thing with a bell curve and move it like this and basically get a nice soft slope.
But unlike shelving EQ, because the actual frequency point is so far away, you're pushing all the phase anomaly out of the audible
range.
So what happens? What happens is, and also you can open up the ceiling on a vocal a little bit. You can get a little more high air, a little more high end, without like giving you this off the 3 or 4K. Because like if I lifted 6 or 7K, what I was looking for, you would fuck up down below. So this is the longest thing for the Chandler has like a 12 or a 16K. And I'll give it just a little bit sometimes. Just a little bit of that opens up. It's a very gentle slope, so it just opens up the vocal just a little bit. Takes the top off the microphone a little bit.
Nice.
Yeah. Nerd shit.
Very interesting. And then what do you use as a compressor?
I use the Slate Dragon, and I've used it for ever. I don't even think Slate makes them anymore. I think they've been like parted out to a different company. I think Slate's just software.
Is it a model of another, like what kind of compressor is it?
I would describe it. It's like an 1176 with like a Neve output transformer. This is essentially what they were trying to do, but with the control of a distressor. And it also has what I absolutely love. It has a mix knob, so you can parallel right in it. So I can get some of the compression. I can bring out some of that flavor in the voice, but then I can dial down the mix knob to keep myself out of trouble. Like, so I don't, paint myself in a corner and over compress a vocal, but you can get that vibe on it. I absolutely love it. And I've used it on every vocal and every mix. I've done since I've gotten like at least 10, 12 years ago. So it's my desert island piece of gear.
I love parallel compression on vocals. I basically started doing that on everything, using some kind of either compressor or saturator or something with a mix knob to add in, to basically take the, not the noise floor necessarily, although that's part of it, but all the low things, just pull them up a little bit, but without sacrificing the transients and actually cutting off the dynamic range. You can get what I like to think the vibe of a compression without killing your transients is essentially what you can get the vibe without losing the impact. Somebody asked what's the difference between that and a sharper Q boost. The tighter your Q, and just listen, the tighter your Q, the more ringing you're going to get at that frequency. And so if you go and just as an experiment, bring up whatever your ringing is a phase shift that's happening. So anytime you have phase shifts, you're losing clarity. There's weird things happening. So the tighter the Q, the more. And
it's actually a timing thing. Is what happens with the phase shifting thing.
Yeah, that's right. It's like things go like this. They go out of phase.
Yeah. And so a good experiment, just to hear an extreme example of what it is make like a 10 dB boost on your EQ of choice, whatever you got, and start at like 100 and then listen to a thing of music and tighten the cue and hear what happens as it gets tighter and tighter and tighter. It kind of, there's only way to really explain it is to experience it. And then with a tight cue or a high cue number, sweep it and just hear how you get this kind of weird, like resonance filter almost across your track. And it's like when you hear autotune for the first time, like once you hear it, you're like, oh shit, that's that sound. That's that thing. And then it makes sense. So it like all things audio, try it really dramatically first to see what the fuck it does, what you're hearing. And so like make a really tight cue and do a really huge boost and then just sweep it and you'll hear that thing. And then you'll kind of hear it less as you mellow it out a little bit.
That actually, that's a great general piece of advice too, that I talk about and I do a lot, but I always feel like I should do more, which is, and this relates to new gear, relates to EQ, whatever. Whenever you have something new or you want to try something, try the extreme version and then bring it back. If you want to boost something, boost it twice as much, hear what it's doing, and then pull it back down. Don't like keep inching it forward, or like maybe I'm try a little more extreme on this keyboard. Like maximize the potential of anything that you have and see what that does, and then bring it back to the amount that you want.
It goes back to dialing in. Like I was kind of taught how to dial in guitar amps, but basically just turn every knob, your treble knob, all the way up, all the way down, all the way up, all the way down. And now you actually get a feeling for what happens with that treble, what that particular knob actually does. They go to the mid knob, all the way up, all the way down, all the way up, all the way down. And when you hear it that dramatically, you learn what it does. So every pedal, every piece of gear I get, I basically turn every knob all the way one way, all the way the other, and just get a vibe for what it does. You know?
And with so many things too, and this, with like synths, I mean, I'm looking at my MS-20 right now, which has all kinds of
What's up, Ryan?
All kinds of ways to do really extreme shit on it. Sometimes combinations will yield crazy results too. So all the way up on one knob, all the way down on another, all the way up on a third. Like I noticed that for the first time when I was, I don't know, 19 or so, and I was playing with a fuzz factory where depending on where they are, the gating is different. But then if this knob's all the way up and this one's down, the gating is at the same place, but the sound is different. Like it's all kinds of interesting things to explore. But yeah, trying the extreme thing and then understanding what it does, so then you can use it subtly. That's a big pro hack. So maybe we can get into some questions. We got a lot of good questions this week. We'll just start in vocal world. We do some sort of easy ones or simple ones. Matt, a guy named Matt Law, another Matt. Shout out, Matt.
Good start.
Asked about reverbs, reverb plugins, delays. I mean, John and I have talked about this on some other streams. You know, I don't. My go-tos tend to change every 6 months because I like playing with new shit. John turned me on to the Seventh Heaven reverb, which is amazing. You know, I will throw on.
Is that like a Bricasti emulation?
Yeah, and it's great. It sounds.
Everybody loves the Bricasti. You know,
yeah, it's fantastic sounding. Yeah. I love all the Valhalla stuff. Some of it is a little one note. But
it's a great note.
Yeah, the vintage verb is great. Everybody's using it on everything, but there's a reason for it. It's easy usable. I like their plate. I love their delay. We've talked about that before. Their somewhat new delay plugin is super, super fun.
Everybody should have the Valhalla stuff. One, because everyone's using it, so you'll be able to open up in your sessions. Two, it sounds brilliant. Three, the dude is apparently great. Like, is a really guys apparently worth supporting. Four, this is a rare thing. A guy mixed a song for me. It had been a while since somebody else had mixed a song that like wasn't a Serban or something. Yeah. And this guy, who was Dan Wilson's guy, mixed a song for me, and the reverb was so beautiful and so subtle. And it turns out he was using Valhalla, and I actually had to call him up, and I was like, dude, whatever you did to the vocal, next level. It was a beautiful, beautiful room. And he was so cool. He was like, oh man, I'd love to send it to you. And he sent me an email that was just the track and just his preset, but it was the Valhalla, but with a ton of shit before. So he had like an EQ before the reverb on the send. He had some post-processing on it. So I think that people don't want to be afraid when they talk about reverb. It's not just about the reverb. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's why part of the reason why I think outboard reverbs are so great is because people fuck with them once they're on the way in. Like so often with like a reverb plugin, they're like, oh, here's the reverb plugin. I'm done with reverb.
That's the sound. There you go. Yeah.
And it's like, no. Like you can put stuff before it or after. Put a decapitator before the reverb so that whatever's going to the reverb feed is getting crunchy or warm, or put a heavy EQ so it's only giving a reverb to the top notes or the bottom notes, or you know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
Yeah. So that Bahal stuff is really great, especially when you're not afraid to fuck with it before or after. You know?
Yeah, EQing both into and out of reverbs and delays is hugely important. I mean, certainly in all those plugins they have, not all of them, but many of them have EQs or high pass or low pass filters, and definitely use those. I mean, you know, a very clean delay sounds so much different than if you high pass and low pass it to a very narrow range, and you get a different kind of echo and a different kind of slap. But there's really interesting things that you can do by compressing into it. You know, one of the tricks I like to do, I don't do as much anymore, but it was like a fun trick, is a vocal that's not heavily auto-tuned, heavily auto-tuning the send to to the reverb or delay, so that the delay and reverbs have a different kind of perfectly in tune thing. So it's almost like the vocal pops out more because the vocal is much more natural sounding, but then the ambience behind it is perfectly in tune. It doesn't work for everything, and I don't do it a ton, but when it works, it's a really beautiful effect. It's kind of unexpected, and you don't really know why it's happening that way. Like ways to make a lead vocal pop out. I mean, we talked about on some streams before about taking your background vocal bus and doing some multi-band compression, or doing things that sort of blur it a little bit so the lead vocal pops out more. But you can do that with reverbs and delays in interesting ways too, or have a blanket reverb for your session that's used on a lot of stuff, but then have an extra mono reverb or slap on the lead vocal so it just has an extra presence to it. I think people don't go deep enough on that stuff sometimes.
I'll do that with doubles a lot too, where I'll take the double and I will just robot the fuck out of it, like get it absolutely perfect, absolutely in time, so that there's that like harmonic tone center, so everything feels in tune. There's something exactly in tune in time, and then when the lead vocal isn't as heavily affected, it kind of allows it to sit on top. So you get the personality and the heart of the person. You haven't ironed all that out. You get all the emotion and the things that move you, but you still have that pop perfectness under. My dad is literally texting me from Australia going, what kind of cables do you guys use?
I use basic balanced XLR cables. I don't get real fancy. I'm not doing like gold wire or silver wire or any of that stuff.
I have
before, but
I'm using the cables that I stole from his his garage 10 years ago still.
maybe he's passive aggressively asking you about it. Give me my fucking cables back.
I think T-Collar just joined, so if you want to talk about really great producers, man.
I love T-Collar. I haven't seen him in years.
He's the fucking man. But I think he just shout outs to my guy. But we're on reverbs.
Reverbs and delays.
Yeah. I also love pedals and hardware delays.
Oh yeah, we were just talking about that. I linked you with Brandon Arriaga from Pretty Much. He was talking about building a pedal board for vocals. I mean, maybe you could speak on that for a second, because it's something that I've been thinking about doing too. The idea of having a setup, and I don't know how to, you tell me the options, but I feel like having a setup where you can run as an insert a guitar pedal board to manipulate, but you need to deal with line level and guitar level, things like that.
Yeah, I'm kind of bummed that people are figuring this out, because that was like my secret for years.
That's what we're here to do. We're giving them away. We're giving away the secrets.
But I would, it's tricky. So the signal, people have to understand, like the signal coming out of a guitar is very, very low. And so most guitar pedals are meant to run on like really, really low level signals. Line level has a lot more voltage. And if you run like a line level through a guitar pedal, most of the time it's going to sound shitty. And if you run guitar level through something that needs line level, you're not going to be able to hear it, or it'll be all.
Yeah, it's like running a guitar without a DI or something.
It just doesn't fucking
volume. You need something to amplify that sound.
A preamplifier.
And in this case, we're talking about things that are already at line level to then run through guitar pedals. You need something that will.
Exactly. So to go out, I wish I could move this around, but my camera's so delicately perched, because it turns out you can't do it sideways, and I didn't charge my iPad because I'm an idiot. But to come out of your interface, it'll most likely be line level. You need something to knock it down from line level to guitar level. A lot of times people would use a DI backwards, which is kind of a iffy hack for that. There's a bunch of companies now that have gotten hip that this is something that people want to do. And there's a big reamping craze for a while too. So I love this company called Little Labs, which is actually down the street, but it was one of the engineers from Conway. It was clearly a dude who worked in a studio and was like, these are the problems that we have. I'm going to make gear for actual problems that occur in actual studios that people will need. So it's like really unsexy gear, but it's just gear that like does something that you absolutely need, you know? But I have a couple boxes. They have something called a Red Eye reamp box, which basically knocks down the line level. So you go out of Pro Tools into this box, and then you can go into your pedals. And then when you come out of your pedals, you either have to go into some sort of amp simulator or a DI to get it back up to line level to go back into Pro Tools. I mean, just like a guitar. It's basically once it's in guitar pedal land, your vocal, you need something to amplify it back up. And so I would take with old like DM2, like Boss analog delays that just have that thing that you can't get from anybody else that everyone's still chasing. I would take a vocal, I would send it out that, and then I would record the delay sound. Then I would take another vocal, I would do it again, and I would shift the delay time just a little, just so it was a little bit different. And then when you brought both of those tracks in left and right, all of a sudden I had this crazy stereo delay from this mono delay pedal, and it got really, really wide. And it seems like most pedal delays are really good, especially with vocals, of staying out of the way of the vocal. There's like a warmth so that you hear it, but then you can it doesn't muddy up the vocal. You can still hear the vocal on top of it. And again, talking about EQing, there's so much specific EQ to the way the guitar pedals sound, because they're not meant to treat a full frequency up to 20K bright vocal. Whereas if you're in the computer, they have to deliberately choose to not process that kind of information. With guitar pedals, it's a much narrower range, so you're going to get sounds out of it that are much more in the mid range. So so it's not going to stomp on the vocal in the same way. That's to Eric Estrada from O-Town, who's talking shit on the Lions right now. Well, you really do love those Lions. I really do. You know, it's nothing shows loyalty like being a Lions fan for years. It's self-flagellation or something, right? Yeah, you know. Hey, look, we don't kink shame around here. Like whatever you're into. The cool thing about going through pedals, like the way that we're talking about, which kind of goes back to what we were talking about with reverbs, is I think a pro hack for a lot of people is print your verb. Like once you've got the vocal done, print the verb, and then all of a sudden when it's an actual stereo track, for whatever reason, you're so much more inclined to do shit with it. You're so much more inclined to automate it. You're sure, and there's a difference between automating the printed reverb and automating your send. Do it. It's a different thing, and it can be really fucking cool. And I find for some reason that when I'm actually mixing, when I print my reverbs, I get a much better result because I'm more apt to fuck with them. I'm more apt to treat them like the audio they are instead of some random esoteric. Will you print an individual reverb for each track? Do you have like a master reverb that you're sending a bunch of things to? That's a really good question. Thank you. It's a really good. You should do this, Matt. The answer is it depends, and it's two different. I usually have a couple of reverbs on a track, like I have a couple of delays, and I have a couple of master reverbs, like a good on my personal template. I always have like a good lexicon hall and a good lexicon plate. So you have individual reverbs and delays per track, and then additionally you have a few masters? Well, exactly. So I have the masters, and the point of the masters, for the most part, is to make everything sound cohesive in the same space. If you're using a different fucking reverb for everything, like that's, I think, is a lot of reasons why people's stuff sounds a little that they don't realize when they're beginning, is because they're putting a delay on each track, a reverb on each track, and they're doing it different for each thing. If you have a master reverb, it kind of just helps put everything, make it all the same song.
Yeah.
But then on the tracks, or sometimes on buses, I'll have different reverbs and or delays, more for effect. Like if you want like a cool slap on the snare, or you want that Lennon double vocal sound and stuff like that, I would normally kind of be more apt to put that on the track than to have it, than to have it. But on certain things you do it track based, but then I usually have one or two or three reverbs that are meant to just send everything to.
So you'll print per track oftentimes and manipulate it for that. That's an interesting thing. I think I don't do that enough. And anytime and I think it applies to lots of stuff, is like software synths and stuff that's in MIDI, printing it to audio somehow changes the psychology and makes you then treat it in a different way.
Honestly, the next thing that you're doing, go in and just for shits and giggles, print your verbs. And I hadn't thought of it, but it's very true. I've been doing a lot of composing lately, and I treat the sections differently once I've printed them as audio than when they're just floating around as MIDI. For whatever reason, there is a real psychological difference.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's see. Omo asked, how do I consistently develop the best harmonies, like learning vocal harmonies? I don't think there's any hacks for that sort of thing. I think you just got to kind of do it a lot and study it and learn it.
But I think that there are a couple of things that you can tell people right away.
Okay, yeah, go.
I think that a lot of people, I didn't well into college, and I'd been making records and doing, and this is going to sound really stupid, I grew up with harmonies. I knew intrinsically how to sing them.
Yeah.
I'd never really considered put the one and two together, that they're just notes in a chord. Mm-hmm. All harmony is you're making a chord with a voice. For some reason, that really escaped me, just that concept. So first of all, if you just think of essentially harmonies as notes in a chord, reach out to a piano or reach out to a guitar, play that chord.
That's a good point.
See where your lead vocal is in that chord. Guarantee it will be somewhere. And if you're hurting for a harmony, there it is. If you've got a 3-finger chord on the piano, there's 2 other notes in there that are at least a good starting spot to go, So if you've got the 1, you can put the 3rd and the 5th in there. But if you're trying to look for a little push, you can put the 6, you know what I mean? So I think that's a good start. And the other thing is, and I know you can speak to this, is I think a lot of beginning producers, would be amazed at how often you'd use a pedal harmony. And what a pedal harmony, I mean, is just one note going through. So you've got somebody else singing a different melody, and then you've got one guy just singing the main note. Maybe it changes once, but that almost always is useful when you're building stacks of vocals.
And that's often very much in almost always, although not always, but almost always in the chords that are playing at the time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good call. I think piano, there's a reason that when you're taking music theory in college, and they do the sort of basic intro to music theory, it's always keyboard based. So you can actually physically see all the notes in front of you. You just go like this and it hits a note. You're not thinking about frets, or you're not thinking about whatever it is for other your fingering on horns or brass or woodwinds or something. You see physically all of the notes in front of you. Learning basic piano and thinking of harmonies and figuring them out that way is probably the best way to learn. And then I would say just singing a lot. Singing harmonies, learning harmonies, trying to hear them in songs, and singing the different parts. So you hear a lead vocal and you sing the harmony along with it, and you get your brain into that, okay, this is the relationship. Because a lot of times when I'm having artists, especially new artists, cut harmonies on things, they're like, I don't know, it doesn't sound right. And it's like, well, I know it doesn't, I don't say it like it, but I know it doesn't sound right to you because you don't sing a lot of harmonies, because you've only sung your lead vocal before. So you don't realize that weird pedaling note where you're singing exactly the same thing and then it moves by a half step and then it goes back. And even though your melody's doing this, it's going to fit really nicely. It's a lot of just, trust me, try it. But singing yourself will help a lot.
I literally need to get that sign from my studio. Trust me, try it. I feel like that's the mantra of a vocal producer.
Yeah, that's a big thing.
Yeah, trust me, try it. You had said something. I'm trying to go back. pedals. Oh, we had spoken last time about just the. See, I actually learned on guitar for the most part. So when I had to like play a little piano in college, it was really playing catch up. But I think that it's so valuable. Just go on Craigslist or whatever, get a cheap $75 synth, Casio tone or whatever. But just to have something acoustic that you don't have to run through your system, that has its own speakers. I use a Whirly here in the studio, but just to have those notes in front of you is invaluable.
I think that's hugely important. Yeah, I almost everybody I've worked with or worked under or worked around has some version of that. You need something physically that you can go like this and make a note happen. It's useful for a lot of things, not just figuring out harmonies.
I use it on my phone all the time too. I have like a little piano app on my phone that you can just pick in a pinch in the middle of the studio. If that's not there, I'll have that open on my phone just to be able to find notes.
Yeah, that sounds good.
My manager just joined. I have to call you soon, actually, Frank.
We'll holler at you, Frank.
Yeah.
This is sort of an involved question, but I really like it because I think I don't know if answering directly makes sense. I may read it and then give a thought, but then open it up to you. Ty asked a question. Sometimes I'm cutting vocals and it just doesn't feel right, or they just don't feel right, but I'm not sure what the problem is. I don't want to bum the vocalist out and kill the vibes by saying it isn't right, but I don't know what it needs. Any tips or tricks if something isn't feeling right? I want to answer the larger question and then maybe see if you have thoughts on it, which is
drugs.
Yeah, drugs. You don't want to be a person in a session that says no. You want to be a person in a session that offers other options. So just cutting down ideas in a writing session, when you're producing, working on lyrics, working on melodies, working on beats, doing vocals. If you're a person that says no, it's just bad. You just don't want to do that. You want to try other things. You want to suggest other things. You want to capture what you have and move on. I mean, it's just saying no. It doesn't really answer the question of what to do if you don't know what to do. But
I think that's a bigger life hack. It's like, don't shit on something unless you've got an alternative. Like, I hate in the studio saying I don't like something if I can't say why or what should be different about it.
Yeah, it's a tough question. I don't think there are really any. There's no hacks for that sort of thing. I think one of the things that at least we're trying to offer here, and maybe this, I'm putting myself on the spot here, is you got to learn more techniques for how to have creative breakthroughs. You got to learn to try new things, whether it's let's take a break, let's try a different key, let's sing it on guitar, let's whatever. I mean, there's all kinds of little things like that just get people out of the headspace. But you as a vocal producer, which is often the role of producer or co-writer because you're really vocal producing as you go, is to have the experience and the comfort and the knowledge of how to just keep things moving. And there's no one answer, or I don't know, thoughts on that. It's sort of a tough question.
No, I think I have a couple of thoughts on that. So first of all, you mentioned taking breaks. Yeah. I used to go like 6-10 hours at a time, mixing, whatever I was doing. I have found that one of the best things you could do is, it's why I picked up smoking again, which is terrible and I don't recommend, but it's the go outside for like 10 minutes and just get away from it. I found much better results giving frequent breaks than I have. I've gone, I get much better results with less effort if we do like 4 10-minute sessions in an hour than 1 60-minute session in an hour, if that makes sense. If you're on a roll, you want to keep going, but there's a real, one, it's a mental break. 2, it's a forest for the trees. A weird thing. Do you know the engineer, Jeff Emmerich? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Jeff,
he invented engineering, basically being like 19 and recording the Beatles.
So he had done a bunch of America records. And so he would come over to the house a lot before he'd passed away, and he would like come over for dinner and shit. And I would get to talk his ear off all the fucking time. And I remember one day asking him if he thought that analog was better than digital. And he's like, analog sounds better than digital. And this is how it applies to what we're talking about. Because he's like, when you used to do cut to tape, the guy would have to practice for like 3 weeks because he knew he was coming in. He would be super practiced. You would play it, and then after 2 minutes, after you played the whole thing, you would have to rewind. And that 3 minutes of rewind, you had to think about your sins. You had to think about how you fucked it up. You had to think about how you're going to make it better. And now we just kind of go, take, Apple Z, no, good, take, Apple Z, no, Apple Z, take. And that space, his claim was that space from having to rewind after a take is the real reason why tape sounds better. It wasn't any sort of audio fidelity thing. It was just that's so the process that went into it, you know?
Well, I had almost exactly the same conversation with the producer, Flood, who is known for, people could Google Flood. I worked with him on a 30 Seconds to Mars record years ago.
No way, really?
And he said, we had a day off where the band was doing some promo something. And I was like, hey, we've been hanging for a few days. Can I nerd off? Can I just nerd out around you about a couple things? Can I just ask you questions? He's like, fire away. So I asked him about, because he did Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, the Smashing Pumpkins double album, among other amazing things, U2 and Nine Inch Nails and all kinds of stuff. But I asked him, I asked about the process of making the record, and he said they recorded it. Basically, all the basics of that album were a live band recording to tape. The Smashing Pumpkins played live, and I said, "Oh yeah," and I did the I'm in the know thing. I was like, "Yeah," because tape sounds so much better. I was like, "Totally," and he's like, "No, I don't give a shit about how it sounds. It's the psychology of it." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, when you can't edit and you have everybody playing together, people show up differently." Mm-hmm. I was like, oh, okay, you're a producer. I'm still learning shit. But this idea, the psychology is everything, and the approach is everything.
We had talked about Rick Rubin. That's the thing that so many bedroom producers forget, is they think it's just all about the beats. It's all about getting the best out of your artists. That's the producer. A lot of producers, especially back in 70s and 80s, are essentially just psychologists. Is trying to prep the people. So producing is more. In fact, I would say that only the tip of the iceberg is when you're in with the artist. I think a lot of it's before and the artist and after. And one of the things I was going to say is you had said to not say no to the artist. I make a conscious effort, ironically, to create an environment where we can say no. I think that there's a certain amount of trust that the artist knows that I believe in them enough, and this is why we're here together in the room, that we don't have to coddle each other. So 100%. I actually say, and strangely enough, in my particular situation with the vibe that I try to create in the studio, every time you say no, it actually kind of gets appreciative, where then when you say yes, it means more, because my artists know that I'm not being like, man, you really sounded like you on that take. I wasn't real, that I'm not giving false praise to make them feel better. So that's when I'm really, you crushed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is a psychology of that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, but that only works because I work really hard to create a bubble in there where if I come up with an idea, the artist can tell me it sucks and I can appreciate them for it. And if they tank one, I can go, God, that wasn't your best, and vice versa,
It seems like the fundamental answer to the original question about if something doesn't feel right and you don't know what it is, but you don't want to just say it sucks. You definitely don't want to just say it sucks, but you want to be able to build trust. You want to build trust that, because it's one thing if you guys both know you're not there with it. It's another thing if the artist thinks it's amazing and you think it sucks. On some level, maybe you shouldn't be working with the art. Everybody's got to make a buck, but if you have different creative visions on what's good, it's you're in a rough spot, and I don't have a good answer for that.
I think that everybody has to make a buck area is really dangerous. If you don't believe in something, if you can't find something that you believe in it, there's no amount of money that's going to be good. I've seen so many producers have some success and then take money gigs and then lose their careers because they stopped making records that were fucking awesome.
Yeah.
And I think that you really, you can have a wide breadth of people that you work with, but if you can't, but the trick is you have to find something that you're genuinely excited about. If you're ever working just for the money, the results is probably going to be trash. And if the result is trash, you now have something on your discography that's trash. And I would rather have a little less money and the opportunity to work more because my discography looks good than the other way around. I think it's dangerous.
I totally agree.
The other thing is really quick. You said the flood thing, and going back to that, because I think a lot of people get caught up on the sound of tape.
Yeah.
When we, one of the first things I got to work on was the Switchfoot record. I think Nothing Is Sound. I think it is the one that had Dare You to Move on it and shit. And at the beginning, Fields was like, "We got the budget for tape. We're gonna like record all the drums to tape because drums on tape sound better." And we did a test where we did a couple of tracks and recorded all the drums to tape and multed it out to Pro Tools. And everybody's sitting in the control room going, "Yeah, man, fucking tape fucking rules." And we all went out to lunch. And when we came back, we were like, just for shits and giggles, and we did a blind A/B test where, like, you know, only the assistant knew and nobody else did. To a man, every single person chose the Pro Tools one and not the tape one.
Yep.
To a man, every single person was like, we like when it was a blind test and we didn't know it was different, we were just picking our ears.
The problem with tape machines and modern records is that tape machines soften transients and they soften impact of things. And now if you're in computers with samples, they just sound very different. And it can be an aesthetic choice, but if you want the hardest hitting thing, the most competitive, the most in your face, it's much easier to get that out of something that's not, you know, killing transients and softening the sound.
It's weird how that's changed, because at the very beginning, everybody hated digital because of the transients. And now we're used to that kind of like take your head off shit. And so now tape feels soft, you know?
The culture's just changed. And people are finding that compression distortion sound in different things now.
I've got a guest star outside of the studio.
Oh yeah. Bring him in.
Come on. I see you. Sorry, he was just literally sitting at the window outside of the studio watching.
Finally, the stream gets interesting.
Yeah, the real star of the stream.
Do you want to introduce your friend?
Yeah, this is Baz. This is the studio assistant. Mm-hmm. He eats his weight in food. It's very expensive, but outside of that, he's pretty good. Why were you outside, dude? Hang on. Sorry, I'm not going to talk to my dog while human.
The love is worth the money.
Yeah.
Let's see. We got another 8 minutes left.
Rapid fire.
Do you want to? Let's see. Josh asked thoughts on comping. This is actually a question from the first time we worked, which we didn't get to. I didn't have a really good answer for it. I don't know if I still do without like going in. I feel like so many people. I mean, all the people I know that do serious vocal production do it in Pro Tools. I think there's some people who use Logic, and now Ableton apparently is getting lanes in the new version. We'll see how it works. I'm holding out hope, because if I can switch over to Ableton, I'm doing it. But or completely over to Ableton, because I love creating in it. But I've seen different people do different kinds of comping. I do kind of like I'm playlisting rapidly. I'm trying to name playlists on the fly. I then have tracks below it that are completely muted out. So if I want to pull particular things, I can see them visually. I kind of have a haphazard way of doing it. I don't know. Do you have particular thoughts or a method? I mean, it's also hard to do without just showing it. But
well, I think there's headspace things. Vocal comping. One half of it's done while you're tracking. Especially these days where people want.
That's a really important thing. Maybe that's the most important thing to say about all this. And I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No,
comping as you go. When you hear something great, noting it, pulling it somewhere, marking it. If you're making a comp, like you have a track that's going to be your comp. So as you go, you literally pull things down. Mm-hmm. Hugely important. I don't do that enough.
Yeah. A friend of mine really got me. I used to have back when like we had bigger budgets and there was assistants and stuff. There was literally a guy in the back of the room that I would be like, literally anytime I was like, oh, that was good. He would just mark take 3, you know, like, right. And he would have a word sheet. That's like the old school way of doing it. And you can kind of do it digitally now, but if you can get like a lyrics sheet and basically if an artist does something particularly good, just put down the number of that take. And then you at least have a starting point right at the beginning. You can, without even listening, come up with a rough comp of at least stuff that you thought was good. these days, as you're tracking, especially in Pro Tools, you can highlight it and bring it down to a muted track. That's also nice because you can have all the effects on it, that you might not would have tracking.
I also mark playlists for that too. Like if we're doing, I like doing full passes with artists lots of times if the song can work that way, and I'll just go chorus 2 great, verse 2 second half great, and my playlists end up being super long names, but
well, I don't do it on the playlist. There's a comment section on Pro Tools. I don't know about Ableton, but I will just mark down. I've kind of got a little shorthand that I've gotten down where I can just knock that shit off. The other thing is though is that once you've done that, and once you're doing like serious comping, like after the fact everybody's left and you're trying to get it good, and I think this holds true for anything that you're doing in audio, and I think that we talked about it a lot, is don't lose the forest for the trees. Like, don't just listen to each word or each sentence as an island. Listen to it in context, because just because something might be a little more in tune, but in the context of the rest of the flow, which is how everybody else is going to listen to it, it might not work as well as the other take. Always, we were talking about it with the writer that I have here. She was coming up with a lot of like great bits of songs, but then if we would like put them in the context of the song, it wouldn't gel as much. And I was like, you want to make sure that you really listen often, almost front to back, not just the chorus, but let's go front to back and make sure that the decisions that you're making work in the context of the whole thing.
Well, this was I've said it, I think, on one of the streams before, but it's a story I heard about Michael Jackson, that when they were doing things like Thriller and these huge budget albums, when he was doing his solo stuff, that if they would make a change, even like a mix change to the bridge, he would want to listen to it from the top to see how everything fits in context. And certainly you can't always do that all the time, but that's a really important part of this thing, is what does the vocal in the second chorus sound like in the context of, you've heard the intro and the verse and the pre and the first chorus and the post chorus, and you're a minute and a half or 2 minutes into a song before you get to this part. In that context, how does it feel, and how does it function?
Ironically, with Michael, there's a lot of things that you should take from him and that you should do, and then there's a few very specific things that you should absolutely not. I'm
interested in those. What do you mean? And because, by the way, I think we talked about it last time. Everybody should go look at and go listen to the Michael Jackson acapellas, which are everywhere. They're fucking astonishing.
Well, I think very specifically the whole little kid thing should be off the table.
In terms, what do you mean little kid thing?
And Michael Jackson,
right. I'm like his voice was high pitched. Oh, she's making jokes here. R.I.P. Bruce Swedian.
I know, Bruce. Fuck. What a talented man. But in terms of vocals, he had it. And I actually was thinking about it. I went back and watched some of our thing from last time just to make sure to try and minimize the ways I sounded like an idiot last time. He is just the kind of the high watermark of how to record vocals. We were talking about the effects of proximity effect and the polar patterns on the mic, and everybody knows he kind of sang on an SM7 a lot. But one of the things I heard he did from Westlake was he would track a couple vocals, like if he was doing groups or harmonies, right up on the mic. Then he'd get another couple passes and take a step or two back and do it. And then he would take another step or two back and do it more. And so not only was he getting more natural ambience, but he was actually affecting the EQ of the voice too. So as he was stacking, they weren't all of the same exact EQ through them. And so you could stack more vocals and they would fit together better because it wasn't all the same sonic information all the way through.
That's a thing that I learned a number of years ago about trying to make a gang vocal choir sound. What you're talking about is a part of this, that there's a lot less low end on those. So if you record a bunch of vocals like this and add them up, it's going to sound like a big gang of close vocals. But if you're actually recording a group of people singing, they don't all have individual close mics, so you're losing a lot of low end. You're getting more room, but there's a lot more low end lopped off. So the effect of that is really important.
Well, the other thing is for those people working at home and having to do a lot of that themselves, is take a couple steps back from the mic.
Yeah.
And like honestly, if I'm doing gang vocals by myself, I'll like turn and sing into a corner and just keep
same.
the mic in the same place and just there's a lot of stuff that we do that I sometimes forget that a lot of people don't, what I mean? And so, I would literally have just the mic in one place and do like 10 takes with me walking around the thing. You can't EQ it differently afterwards because there's a difference between EQ and having stuff that sounds differently. Just taking off low end isn't going to sound the same as stepping 4 feet back from the microphone. You will have less low end when you step 4 feet back off the microphone, but there's different compression, there's different room ambience, there's a bunch of different things. You can both have their place.
You can fake it a little bit with that by just taking off low end and taking off some high end, and you can fake it by. There's a lot of ways to do it. I mean, you have to think about the complete sound that's happening. When a bunch of people sing together, they're not all exactly in tune. They're not all exactly in time. There's more of the sound of the room around them. They're going to hit the microphone and the preamp and the compressor at the same time. So the compression relationship will be different. So if you're doing a bunch of individual vocal chain vocals, you're already losing some of the effect of a bunch of people being in a room. So there's conceptual ways to manipulate that, but it's definitely best to just do it in a room.
Which, bringing it all the way around, watch me just tie this up in a bow.
Let's go.
It adds to, if you're doing harmonies or group vocals and you're talking about reverbs, put that EQ before you get the reverb send. Yeah. Because if you're doing a choir from or not a choir, but a group of vocals, like a gang vocal or harmonies, before you hit the reverb send, take a little top, take a little bottom off, simulate what it would sound like if there was actually 10 of you singing around a mic. Do that thing.
I think that's great. Well, we've hit about an hour here, an hour and 2.
All right.
Matt Beckley, I love you. It's a pleasure.
Rad.
I'm loving these guitar pedals you've lent me, and I will continue to report back. We should do a whole episode just on guitar stuff. I know people ask some questions about that. I'll hit people back in the DMs, but we should maybe do a whole thing about guitars too, because there's been a bunch of questions about that. So
I have the whole setup,
it's so good.
Right there. So
we can talk about all that stuff. And if you want my orange, you can borrow it. I can send it over. I'm curious if you like it or not.
Is that a euphemism?
Yes, it is.
Dude, thanks for having me, dude. I love doing these things.
This is super fun, man. It's hopefully people get some knowledge out of it. And hit us up if you guys have other questions or you need some clarification on stuff. We're just here to be a resource. So this will all be up on audio version tomorrow and up on YouTube, and it'll be on my IGTV as well right after this. So thank you guys. Much love.
Be good.
Peace.